All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks all for being here. We're really excited about tonight's Salon. And we're here tonight with Elizabeth Harris, who is the author of How to Begin, or not, of How to Sleep at Night, and will be talking with us about how to begin and sustain your novel.
Lots
Um,
of how-tos. Very exciting. Good.
exactly. We'll have lots to take away with us. And we're so excited to have her here with us. So, for our opening lines, we have the idea to explore a moment where you realized you couldn't keep controlling every aspect of your life. How did you receive and process this realization? So, this will help us get started about, starting your novel and sustaining your novel, thinking about something that might be stuck in your life and what it would look like for you to start transforming it. We will go ahead and write about this for 5 minutes.
Hi everybody. As Kenna said, How to Sleep at Night, which is back there, is my first novel. But I've been a journalist for a long time. I've been a reporter at the New York Times for about 15 years, and I've been there for about 20. Most of my writing experience, everything comes through that lens. So I thought I would sort of start there and about sort of kind of what I learned in journalism and how that kind of worked for the novel. Um, so I didn't go to journalism school. I was an English major, and my first job out of college was as a secretary at the New York Times. I was applying for jobs at magazines mostly, because I basically just wanted to figure out a way to make money as a writer and actually pay my rent. Um, and I had grown up in a house that, there were always two or three newspapers on the dining room table all the time, and I watched the news a lot as a kid. I just was always interested in it, but I thought, well, I'm really more interested in writing, so maybe I'll try magazines and things like that. And then I just sort of a friend of a friend got an email from the head of the art department saying they needed a secretary in the art department. And I was like, let me in the door, let me in the door. I don't care. I will do anything. Let me in the building. I did that for a couple of months and then I became a clerk, which is basically you do kind of research and fact checking. And I did that for a few years while I started writing for a lot for the paper. And then I became a reporter trainee. So they had this program for people who had no experience at all, like me. And they would basically try and train you. And like there were no classes, there was no actual instruction, but they trained you just by having you do it. And so they would move you around. It was pretty informal, really, but um, almost everyone kind of moved from place to place. And so I covered real estate and wrote for the real estate section for about a year and wrote feature stories, which was a lot of fun. And I worked with like wonderful people. I covered City Hall for the Metro section for a while. And then I covered breaking news, which, to be totally frank, I was not that excited about doing because it was like the worst schedule on the planet. But it was like one of the best things I've ever done, because I learned so much. I did it for 10 months, I think. I mean, essentially, you sit there and you're there to like babysit in case something happens. And like once in a while, you would sit there and nothing would happen, and that would be very boring. But usually something would happen, or two or three things would happen. And your job was just to find the information as quickly as you possibly could and write it all down 20 minutes ago. Like everything had to be done immediately. There was no being precious about it. You just had to get it out because once it was out, like once the words were down, you could fix it or an editor could fix it. And editors can fix things very quickly. Because that also is a muscle that you just do and do and do and you get better at. And so I sort of learned that like, okay, just get the words down on paper. Don't worry about them being like perfectly wonderful. Don't worry about them being good. Just like get them down and then you can make it better once it's down. And towards the end of my time on that desk, Osama bin Laden was killed the night that I was working. And so I was this very young person with like no foreign policy experience at all. But I was working and they needed somebody to write like the scene story, which is sort of like the way people were responding in the United States to this. And sort of like people like went out into the streets and it was this whole thing. And I remember this editor who was this really wonderful, very old man. old hand editor standing behind me, and she was like, "Have you started yet?" And I was like, no." She was like, "Start right now." And I sort of stood there, and she was standing over my shoulder. It was making me really nervous. And she goes, "In the midnight darkness." And I was like, "Okay, in the midnight darkness, go." And I just wrote the whole thing. And it was this first time where I was like, oh, like a thing, like I'd written hundreds of stories at that point, but like it was a thing where like people were watching me and there was a lot of pressure, and I was still able to do it. And I had been, and it wasn't like I just like woke up able to do this one day. Like I was trained to do this, right? And it was sort of like repetition, and that was sort of how you got there. So that was really important, and for me has been really important in the rest of my journalism career, and also in novel writing, is like this highway was basically built between my brain and my fingers, right? Of just sort of like, rather than worrying about what it's like when it comes out and sort of overthinking it and whatever. I just like, you have a thought, it's out. You have a thought, it's out. You have a thought, it's out, and you can fix it afterwards, right? You also learn how to do things like, as a reporter, you're like out in the field a lot. Like you're not usually at your desk. And so I have written stories on the train. I have written stories. I used to cover education. I would just sit down in like a school gym after a press conference. You write the story in the gym. I've written stories at bus stop for media anyway. Like just continuously getting things out, I think really helps just sort of keep that muscle fresh, basically, and strong. So when I sat down to write the novel, I had this idea. So basically, the book is it's about marriage and ambition and sort of what happens when who you are in the world doesn't match how you see yourself. And it follows three people whose lives intertwine. This is a bit of a tangent, but another journalism thing that sort of came with me to the book is the idea that you have to earn like every second of people's attention. Like you cannot take that for granted ever, because people have the whole world in their pocket, right? And if you're even just a page or two is boring, they're going to put the book down and they might not pick it back up, right? And same is true for a story. Like you have to grab people every step, because otherwise you will lose them and they will never come back. And so on every page of this book, my goal was just like, don't be boring, never be boring. And that was really helpful. But anyway, so I had this idea, and it was late 2021, and I didn't have a commute still, because sort of I'm still not really expected to go into the office. No one was really having meetings still, but my kids were who were very little at the time, and they're still pretty little, were back in school full time, and my wife is a doctor, so she never stopped going to work. And I sort of looked around one day and I was like, well, I have an hour and a half a day when I would normally be on the train, so I might as well just like try and see what I can do. And I wrote it, and I sort of realized something kind of in the doing of it, which is I don't have training. I took one creative writing class during a summer in college that I think was like a screenwriting class. Like I don't even really remember it, to be totally honest. But I do have a lot of training as a reader, which I think probably we all do here, right? Like I was an English major, and I've just always been a big reader. Like as a teenager, as an adult, I just read a lot. So I can read. I realized that I could read my own stuff and sort of realize when it wasn't working. Like if I was bored reading it, then the reader too would be bored, right? Or if I read it and was like, oh, this character feels thin, then they were thin, right? And like that kind of thing. And so there were things that wasn't like kind of that wasn't something I necessarily thought of going into it, but was a thing that kind of worked out to be true, or at least true enough that it exists in the world now. I started with my commute basically, and then it sort of slowly like ate up more and more time. And I have a very, very nice wife who is very, very helpful. And that was the secret sauce to like a work-life balance, honestly, is having a good partner. Because otherwise you are out of luck. Because, really like doing this, like I had a full-time job, she had a full-time job, our kids were, God, like 2 and 5 or 3 and 5 when I started this, something like that. And so, we kind of carved out time. Like I would, it started with just sort of those two chunks of time. Then I started writing after the kids went to bed. Then we would find me 2 hours a day on Saturday and 2 hours on Sunday. And so it just became like every little bit of time I could find. But it worked. And I will also say this is not necessarily the best. How do I say this? Okay, so this is not necessarily the best work-life balance approach necessarily, but like it kind of is. I mean, the doing this while also having a full-time job and a partner with a full-time job and kids was a lot. And so kind of practically speaking, the other thing I did was I kind of stopped doing everything else. Like I tried to be a good spouse, I tried to be a good parent, tried to be a reasonably good employee, and that was kind of it. Like I stopped listening to music, I stopped watching TV, I stopped doing basically everything else because I just didn't have the time. This is not sustainable. I did this once. Now I am writing a second book and I'm on book leave from my day job. So I have one job again, which is very nice. And in the future, who knows? But like that first time, it probably would have been, if I had done it more slowly, I could have probably balanced it better. Yeah, and I guess so. Going back to sort of the craft element of this, yeah. So like the thing about journalism of you spit it out and then you can fix it once it's there, I found really works well for me for the novel as well, because then once you when you know you can, especially with characters, like you can see someone completely in your head, but they don't necessarily translate, right? Because you can be filling in the gaps in a weird way. That was something, one of the characters in this book was somebody who I could absolutely see. He was not one of the main characters, but he was sort of like a important supporting character. And I could totally see him. And one of my first readers was like, who the hell is this guy? Basically. And I don't get this person at all. And I was like, oh, it was so shocking to me because like I could hear him, I could picture him, the whole thing, but I had just not given him enough. So that's really helpful. But that sort of brings me to another slightly disorganized thought. Um, First readers being really important and picking really good people to like that you trust to like workshop your stuff with, right? And like I would imagine that classes probably provide a lot of that, but that is really important to me. And also, but ultimately like you decide, right? Like you're gonna get different people are going to have different reactions to your work, and some people are going to hate this one character, and other people are going to love this character, and it doesn't mean anyone is right. So you have to develop the idea of like you are the person who can see the book, and it's really important to take suggestions and really important to take readers' advice and certainly your editor's advice. But you do like you ultimately are the one who can see this world. And so you have to filter it through your own judgment. As a journalist, I wanted the book to not be too long because, again, you have to earn every second of everybody's attention, right? And so when we were getting kind of towards the editing process, the book was about 105,000 words. And so that's like about 400 pages, roughly, maybe like 380, 390, it's something like that. And I was like, this is too long. This book does not need to be this long. And my editor said, I think you're right. How much do you want to cut? And I said, I don't know. And she said, okay, do whatever you think is best, because she trusts me. And that was great. She's like, do whatever you think is best, bring it back to me and we'll see. I cut about 20,000 words. So I cut almost 20% of the book. And I think it made it so much better. And the way I did this is somebody gave me sort of two suggestions for cutting. Apparently, Stephen King cuts by 10%. He'll go through his draft and he'll cut by 10%, and then he'll go through again and he'll cut by 10%, and then he'll go through again and cut by 10%. I did not do that. What I did was a version of something that someone told me, which is you make a list, I make a spreadsheet of every single scene and what changes in it. And so it has to be either like real substantial character development or a real change in the plot. And if you're not really changing something, if you're not really showing some change, or if it's kind of small, or if you've already done it, cut it. And that was like a revelation to me because once you're actually looking at these things, you like all the kind of like navel gazy stuff, just suddenly you're like, oh, nothing is actually changing here. Like, who cares? I don't need this, right? And you can often pull out, you might have like a 5-page scene and actually only 3 paragraphs are important, right? And so you can pull them out and you can try and find somewhere else for them, or you can try and figure out what was important about them and write them in elsewhere. But that was like just really blew my mind and has been so helpful on the second novel I'm writing as well. Because it really keeps things tight. It really keeps things moving. That's kind of all I had on my mind is should I do a reading now? Or, okay, cool. All right. So I'm just going to be honest and say that I never read aloud from my own book. So this might be terrible. So fingers crossed. Hopefully it's not. Okay, so here's the cover. Didn't they do a nice job on the cover? I had nothing to do with it, but I think it's very pretty. Okay. Okay, we got them, said the kid's art teacher, a recent college graduate whose tangled ponytail stretched between his shoulder blades. We'll see you at pickup, Mom. God, she hated that. She understood that teachers and coaches were not going to remember the name of every parent, but did they have to call her Mom? They all did it, even educators who were weeks away from retirement. But it made her feel worse when the 22-year-old said it, because she was old enough now for that to be true. Her phone buzzed in the side pocket of her leggings as she crossed the parking lot. Dana, Oliver's mom. Hi, Nicole. I'm taking Oliver to the playground this afternoon. Is Henry available? Nicole. No, sorry, he has art class. Dana, Oliver's mom. Oh, too bad. They had so much fun there on Monday. Nicole. They did. Henry scrounged at least 10 water balloons from Oliver. Next, it'll be cigarettes. Dana, Oliver's mom. Oh my God. Is Henry smoking? That's so scary. Nicole. What? Oh, no, that was a joke. Dana, Oliver's mom. Ha ha ha. That's so funny. Jesus, Nicole thought as she stuffed her phone into her pocket. She hoped Oliver was more interesting than his mother.
Well, thank you. First of all, that was a beautiful excerpt. And, speaking of keeping people's attention, I was completely captivated. So I really enjoyed hearing you read.
Thank you.
We're going to go into our first writing exercise. If you'd like to introduce it to folks, and then we'll write for 5 minutes.
Write about a character who feels like they've been stuck in the same place for years. What does it take for them to realize they need to change? Okay, write a scene in which a character experiences an unsettling quiet before a big life change or revelation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There's so much in this conversation that is both like really insightful and also just useful, like manageable tips. So really appreciate all of your time and expertise. Staying in contact with Elizabeth, if you'd like to follow her, she has kindly offered her Instagram, her X, and her email, which is elizabeth.harris@nytimes.com. And we also are open for enrollment if you're a guest with us today. Enrollment for the summer cycle, which is July through September, is open now at girlsrightnow.org/apply. And those applications close April 30th. So we'd love to have you this summer. That's everything. Thank you all so much for the extra minute that you have spared, and just for your time tonight. It's been a pleasure to hear everybody's responses and get to spend some time with you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's really fun.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.